Good day, this is KDO again, Journeying with Jesus. This is video number 4. And in case you missed the other 3, well, go on back so you're part of the journey with us. I call this kind of a continuum, if you will, because we are going to walk together from the point of justification, overcoming, unto the end. I just got in from pulling some weeds, and maybe the corn in these parts aren't as high as an elephant's eye are, but my weeds sure are. And it got me to thinking that if we leave our own weeds unattended, they can grow and take root. And so again, I encourage that we take some time each day and ask the Lord to examine our hearts, take out any of the muck that still remains in there so that a root of bitterness doesn't grow and take away from the purity of heart. Only the pure in heart can see God. So, moving on, I'm going to actually move toward the end of our story, which isn't typical when you read a book, but I want to show us what we're moving toward, what our goal ultimately is, and that is to be with Jesus. And in 2 Peter, I'm in 1 Peter, hold on just a minute. 2 Peter 3, 13 through 15. He talks about, again, the coming of the Lord, the day of the Lord. And he says, "What matter of persons ought you to be found in holy conduct and godliness?" Okay, let's go back to it. "Looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God. How ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness?" His promise, we look forward to his promise for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness will dwell. "Therefore, beloved, looking forward to these things, be diligent, agonize, strive to be found by him in peace, without spot, and blameless." So that is why I'm bringing us toward the end, because what does without spot and blameless look like? That is what Jesus will be looking for. He will also be looking for those who have continued in their faith in him, despite the hardships we will face, despite the trials and tribulations that we will have, especially in these dark days. I have to kind of admit that I like the part in Matthew 23 when Jesus gets after the self-righteous scribes and Pharisees of the day. And he brings the word ought to their attention because they kept following him around and saying, "Well, ought you not be doing these things on the Sabbath?" And they kept telling him how he ought to be. And see, he kind of throws that word ought back in their face. And so he's pointing out again that their hypocrisy, their self-righteousness, and essentially their greed, and that they were neglecting the righteousness of God and living for themselves instead. And that's the world we find ourselves in, people telling us how we ought to be. And yet we need to be like the set-apart ones that Jesus is trying to work with, and not be of the world, but how we ought to be found holy and blameless when he comes back. The reason for the study is because it came to my attention years ago, the word few, like I talked about in the first couple videos, and asking the Lord, why so few? And that has been a very grievous and sad revelation to have to deal with all these years, because, well, we'll look at why so few throughout these videos. What ultimately causes people to go off the narrow path and join the path that is wide toward destruction? One of them is lack of faith. Now, when Jesus talked about in Mark 4, he said to his disciples after a long day, "Let us go to the other side." And he proceeded to go in the boat with him. And because of human fatigue, he was sleeping in the boat while the disciples rowed to the other side, just as Jesus had said, "Let us go to the other side." Keep that in mind. And as he was sleeping, a huge tempest arose, a storm arose, so much so that it caused the disciples to, well, great concern. They said, "Jesus, do you not care that we are perishing?" They woke him up after many, many attempts to, bail the water out of the boat and all their own self-works attempts. And they woke him up, and the first thing he said to them is, "You of little faith." And all he had to do was raise his hand and quiet the waves, quiet the storm with a word. And that is what we're going to need to ultimately trust, is his strength, to trust in his promise to get us through these dark days, to ultimately get us to the other side and finally be with him. We will continue and study with what faith looks like, what obedience looks like, and that will surprise you because it will be counterintuitive. It'll be counter to what the world says we ought to be doing, and instead this obedience is what Jesus tells us to do in order to be found holy, blameless, and without spot. It is totally against what the world would teach us. And so again, I hope and pray you stay with me. I appreciate you being with me thus far until video 4, and I hope to see you again soon. We will continue in this long story and journey together, and hopefully see you all together in heaven. Bye-bye now.